I am not a man who cries easy. 4 years of sleeping in a house where everything still smells like someone who isn't there will cure you of easy sentiment. My forge ran hot most days, the hammer kept my hands busy, and I made a fair deal for myself in Crane's Hollow without asking the town for much. That was the arrangement. I did not, as a general rule, let pieces of folded paper rearrange my entire life. And then one Tuesday in late October, I found one under my shop door. I almost kicked it aside, thought it was a bill from the mill. I picked it up because the fold was wrong. Too small, too neat, like someone had taken a great deal of time over it. I set it on the anvil and opened it while the forge was waking up. The handwriting was a child's, careful, every letter leaning slightly forward as though walking into wind. It said, "My mama cries after dark. She never asks for help. I am asking. The well is going bad and the roof leaks at the east corner and she has not said either thing to anyone. Please don't tell her I wrote this. Her name is Vera Colt. We are 4 miles east past the Garner cutoff." No signature, just that. I stood in the orange light of the forge for a long time. I knew Vera Colt the way I knew most people in Crane's Hollow, by face and by reputation, and by enough distance that neither of us had been inconvenient to the other. She'd come out here with her husband 6 years back, and when Dill Colt died of a chest fever 2 winters ago, she had kept the place and kept her daughter and kept her dignity so firmly intact that nobody in town had felt quite invited to offer anything. She was, by the general consensus, a woman who did not need help. I folded the letter back along its exact creases and put it in my coat pocket. I closed the forge at noon and rode out east on the Garner Road. The homestead came into view the way a tired thing does, gradual, as though it had been slowly sitting down for a few years. The sodden plank roof had a sag at the east corner that the first good snow would make permanent. The well cover was cracked down the middle. There were signs of a woman working hard and long. A kitchen garden laid in with care, a mended fence line, firewood stacked twice as high as necessary by someone who liked the extra margin. But there was more work here than one woman's hands could stay ahead of, and the place knew it. She was at the woodpile when I came around the side of the house. She had her back to me, and she was splitting with the kind of focus that means you are not thinking about splitting. She heard the horse and turned, and her face said two things at once. One was wariness, and the other was a thing she covered quickly. I tipped my hat. "Mrs. Colt, my name is Cal Drum. I run the forge in town." "I know who you are," she said. "I heard your roof needs looking at." The wariness tightened. "Who told you that?" "Crane's Hollow talks," I said, not a lie and not the truth. She looked at me for a long moment, plain dressed, not young, not old, with the look of someone who had been handsome once and still was but had stopped tracking it. Her hands on the axe handle were calloused and steady. "My roof is my business, Mr. Drum," she said. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," I said. "I'm short on occupation this week and roofs are something I can do. I'll take a meal for the work if you're offering." That surprised her. The price was too low to be an act of pity, and she was sharp enough to know it and not quite able to figure the angle. "I'm not asking," she said. "No," I said, "you're not." I don't know what she heard in that. Something, because she set the axe down. "There's coffee," she said. I met Lena that afternoon. She came around from behind the house and stopped about 10 feet away, regarding me the way a careful child does a man she doesn't know, not afraid, just measuring. She was 8 or 9, built slight, with her mother's steadiness in the jaw and large dark eyes. She had a small cloth sack at her hip, and she pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to me. I knew before I touched it what I was going to find. I unfolded it. It said, "Hello, I am Lena. I don't talk, I write. Are you going to fix the roof?" I looked at her. She watched me with those level eyes. "Yes," I said, "I am." She nodded once formally, put the paper back in her bag and walked inside. Vera was watching from the doorway. She had seen the exchange, and I could tell by her face she'd seen the paper but not the words, and she was deciding what to think about it. I waited. She had a fever, Vera said. 2 years ago, she hasn't spoken since. Her voice had a flatness to it that meant she had said the sentence many times and was done being wounded by it. She writes, she reads, she understands everything. I can see that, I said. She looked at me a second longer, then went in for the coffee. I spent the rest of the afternoon on that roof. The sag at the east corner was a failed rafter rotten at the wall plate. I drove back to town for lumber before dark and came back the next morning and spent 3 hours on it. Vera brought me water twice and did not offer conversation, and I did not push for it. Lena came and sat in the yard below and watched me work and occasionally passed notes through a system she'd developed. She'd set them on a fence post, and I'd come down when I needed a break. One said, "Mama said you were probably going to leave halfway through like the Garner boy did with the fence." I wrote back, "Not leaving." She folded my note into her bag alongside the others. The well was a bigger problem. The casing had cracked below grade and the water was coming up with a clay taste that would turn foul by spring. I told Vera straight that first week, because there was no kind way to package it. She stood with her arms crossed and listened and did not change her expression, and when I finished she said, "What does it cost?" I named a number. It was below what it would have cost in town. She said, "I told you I don't take charity." "You didn't ask me for it," I said. "I'm setting the price." She looked at me for a long time. "Why?" she said. I didn't have a clean answer. The letter in my coat pocket didn't seem like information I had the right to give her. I said, "Because the work's worth doing." She let out a slow breath. "All right," she said, "but I'll feed you for every day on the casing, and I'll pay you the rest in spring when I sell." "That's fair," I said. We shook hands on it, and neither of us said anything about how that was the longest conversation either of us had managed in some time. I worked at the Colt homestead 3 days that week and 2 days the next. Lena was present for all of it. She had appointed herself, without discussion, as my assistant. She handed tools, kept track of hardware, and left me notes that were by turns practical and startling. One morning I found a note weighted by a rock on top of my toolbox. Mama sang when she was younger. Before. She doesn't now. I didn't know what to do with that, so I put it in my pocket with the first letter and kept working. She was not trying to manage me. She was, I slowly understood, narrating her life to someone she had decided to trust. There was nothing manipulative in it. She was 8 years old and she had one tool and she was using it. Vera, for her part, stayed guarded. She was polite in the careful way of a woman who has trained herself not to need things and gotten skilled enough that the training has become the person. She cooked well, better than well, and thanked me at the end of each day without asking me back or asking me to stay away. I came back anyway because the well casing took 3 more weeks and I am a thorough man. The night it cracked open was the 2nd week of November. I had gone to check the cattle Vera kept 4 head, and coming back past the well, I could see in the lantern light that the water had gone dark. The ground around the casing was wet in a ring. The crack had spread and turned, and by morning the water table would be compromised past saving until new casing went in 2 days of hard digging minimum in November ground. I stood in the cold for a minute, then I went to the house and knocked. Vera answered in her work coat, lantern in hand, and I told her straight. Her face didn't fall the way a frightened woman's does, it sharpened, the way a woman's face does when she has been expecting trouble long enough that its arrival is almost a relief. "How long?" she said. 2 days to dig and set, if the ground doesn't freeze harder than it is right now. Water from the Garner Creek is 3 miles. "I have a cart," I said. "I'll haul." She looked past me into the dark for a long moment. Then she said, "Come inside, it's cold." I sat at her table for the first time. She put coffee on and Lena came out in her nightclothes and sat down across from me with complete composure, as though nighttime councils were a regular thing in this house. Maybe they were. We talked through it, Vera and I talking, Lena listening and occasionally passing one of us a note. At one point she pushed a note to me. Mama is not as all right as she looks. I passed it back with, I know. Neither of us told her anything. We worked for 2 days in ground that was not yet frozen hard but wanted to be. I dug and Vera hauled, and on the second afternoon Lena carried water and stacked stone and did not complain once. At the end of the second day, when the new casing was in, and the test water came up clean and cold and untainted, Vera Colt sat down on the edge of the well and put her face in her hands for about 30 seconds. I went and checked the cattle so she could have those 30 seconds without an audience. When I came back, she was standing straight again. "Thank you, Cal," she said. It was the first time she had used my first name. She said it the way you say a thing that matters, plain and without decoration. "Glad the ground held," I said. That was all. But something had shifted, the way a door shifts when the frame settles, not open, not closed, just different from before. I found the last note 2 weeks later. It was on the seat of my wagon, left there at some point while I was inside checking the chimney flashing. I nearly sat on it. Lena's handwriting, the letters leaning forward the same as always. It said, "She likes when you are here. She doesn't know I can tell. Lena." I sat in that wagon for a good while. Then I put the note in my pocket with the others, went inside, and asked Vera Colt if she would take a walk with me before the light was gone. She looked at me steadily. She knew what a man walking a woman at dusk in November means when there are no particular errands. "All right," she said. We walked the fence line, and I said what I had to say, plainly. I'd been a widower 4 years and had not planned on being anything else, and then her daughter had written me a letter, and I'd ridden out and found something truer than expecting. I was not a man with a great deal of soft words, but I was steady and I kept my agreements, and I would rather walk this fence line with her for the rest of my life than go back to the forge and be useful to nobody but strangers. She was quiet for a good ways. Then she said, "Lena wrote you a letter." It wasn't a question quite. "First week of October," I said. She wasn't angry. She was doing the arithmetic, an 8-year-old girl, a cloth bag full of folded notes, a man who'd shown up with no good explanation and stayed for a roof and a well and a chimney and 2 months of days. She was counting back and seeing the shape of it. "She's been right about most things," Vera said finally. "She has," I said. She looked at the last of the light going off the plains. The grass was frost pale and the sky was a color that doesn't have a name. After a while she took my arm, not dramatically, not like a woman in a story, just like a woman who has decided something and is done deciding. We were married the following April, on a day that smelled like rain and new grass, by the circuit preacher who came through Crane's Hollow every 6 weeks. Lena stood beside her mother in a dress the color of river clay and did not speak, but she hummed the whole way through, a small, steady sound just under the words of the ceremony. It was the first sound I had heard her make, the best sound I have ever heard in my life. I still have those letters in a tin box on the mantel. Vera knows they're there. We don't talk about them much. But sometimes, when the fire is going and Lena is grown, and the house that was falling apart has been a good house for a long time, Vera will look at that tin box and smile the way you smile at a debt you were glad to owe. A child who couldn't speak had more to say than any of us. She just needed the right way to say it.